The New England blood in our veins runs colder than a coastal winter. At Blackwood Manor, loyalty is a currency my sister Seraphina never possessed. While I, Eleanor, spent a decade tethered to the wasting body of our father, Alastair, Seraphina was busy building an empire of lies in Manhattan. Now, amidst the smell of antiseptic, she has returned with manufactured documents designed to poison his fading mind. My father looks at me with pure disgust, as if I were a parasite eager for his end. He doesn't know that behind the polished veneer of old money, only the one wearing the silver family ring on my finger holds the key to the secret vault. A dead man's justice is a cruel game, and I am the one who keeps the rules. The silence in the halls of Blackwood Manor never meant peace. It was a heavy pressure, born from centuries of family secrets and the scent of decay. They say death smells like lilies and wax, but for me, Eleanor Blackwood, it smells like high-dose antiseptic mixed with rotting oak. For 10 years, I turned myself into a ghost in my own home, an entity existing only to sustain the flickering breath of Alastair Blackwood, a man who built this empire with an iron fist and a heart of stone. In New England, the old money elite don't flaunt their suffering. They hide it behind thick velvet curtains and the most expensive medical care money can buy. While the world outside changed, I was a prisoner in an old library converted into a sick room. My fingers, which should have been adorned with diamonds at Manhattan galas, were rough from chemicals and changing bandages. I learned to read every shallow breath my father took, how to feed him spoonfuls of broth without him choking, and how to keep the dignity of an old lion from crumbling when his own body betrayed him. It was a quiet devotion, the kind of harsh love that the American upper class considers an unspoken duty. But my sacrifice was a performance for an empty theater. The only audience I cared about, my father, was too busy staring at the door, waiting for the shadow of his golden daughter. While I scrubbed stains off the floor, Seraphina was dancing under the lights of the most exclusive clubs in London and Paris. Every time her credit card bills arrived at the manor, I was the one who quietly signed off on them, watching massive sums pay for $1,000 champagne and haute couture dresses worn only once. She sent back vibrant postcards with shallow notes about missing home, but in reality, she only missed our father's bank account. To Seraphina, Blackwood wasn't a family, it was a Gothic ATM. The contrast was as sharp as a scalpel. I owned the sleepless nights watching over his fevers. She owned the tabloid headlines for her style. I owned the smell of illness. She owned the scent of Chanel No. 5. Bitterly, in Alastair's fog-covered mind, I became a symbol of gloom, the harsh reality he wanted to escape. I was the reminder that he was dying. Seraphina, on the other hand, appearing only through edited photos and brief FaceTime calls, was the embodiment of life, of the glory days he regretted losing. My father, a man who once manipulated the stock market with a single frown, was now pathetically blind. He didn't see the dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. He only saw my dullness and lack of spirit. He didn't hear my exhausted footsteps every night. He only heard the silent complaining he had imagined in his head. The peak of the injustice came when he took my cracked hand, looked into my eyes with a vague disgust, and wheezed, "You're only holding on to me because you're afraid to lose the money, aren't you, Eleanor? You're just like your mother, terrifyingly pragmatic." Those words were like a cold current running down my spine. 10 years of devotion were erased by a single toxic prejudice. In that moment, I realized that in the world of the Blackwoods, kindness is a weakness and loyalty is a joke. And then, as Alastair's breath began to smell of the true end, the Queen returned. Seraphina arrived at Logan Airport with 10 Louis Vuitton suitcases and a smile so bright you'd think she was returning from a vacation, not a funeral. She didn't enter the sick room with reverence. She walked in like a conqueror, With perfectly painted red nails, she stroked our father's sunken cheek, whispering sweet lies into his ear about how much it hurt to be away, and how hard she worked to keep the family name alive. I stood in the shadows of the corner, watching the play unfold with cold disgust. Serafina didn't just bring luggage, she brought a plan. In her expensive handbag were digitally altered photos, forged evidence she had meticulously prepared to turn me from a devoted daughter into a drug addict scheming to steal the inheritance. She knew our father was at his most vulnerable, and she was ready to deliver the final blow to the last shred of our relationship. Blackwood Manor is colder than usual tonight. The wind whistling through the cracks sounds like the laughter of our ancestors. Serafina thinks she has won because she captured the final trust of a dying man. She forgot one core thing. I am the one who has run every inch of this house for a decade. I know every loose brick, every safe code, and most importantly, I know about the secret trust fund my father set up long ago, the one only an honest child can touch. The game has only just begun, and I am ready to make the blood of betrayal pay with a perfect collapse. Alistair Blackwood's bedroom at night felt like a tomb draped in silk and mahogany. The dim wall sconces cast long, distorted shadows of our ancestors, who looked down with cold judgment. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was steady, like a hammer striking the rhythm of an approaching execution. I stood at the foot of the bed, hands clenched, feeling the electricity of betrayal vibrating in the air as Serafina began her performance. She wasn't just a spoiled sister anymore. Tonight, she was an artist of destruction. With a perfectly staged, dramatic sigh, Serafina pulled an expensive leather folder from her Hermes bag. She leaned toward our father, who lay propped up on goose-down pillows, his breathing wheezing like an old machine running out of oil. "Dad," she whispered, her voice faking a tremble. "I fought so hard not to show you these. I wanted to believe Eleanor really loved you, but the truth is, she's been waiting for you to die like a vulture." I didn't move. I watched her spread papers across the cashmere blanket. These weren't cheap amateur edits. Serafina had hired professionals. Photos of me at a grimy bar in the Boston suburbs at 3 a.m, where I had actually gone to meet a private doctor to buy the pain medication the hospital refused to increase, had been edited to look like a drug deal. But the real kill shot was the bank statements. They showed massive transfers from Alistair's personal account to an offshore account in my name. In reality, it was an account Serafina had secretly set up using my stolen identity years ago, waiting for this exact moment to detonate. Alistair picked up a photo, his hands shaking from Parkinson's and a growing rage. In the world of old money, the greatest sin isn't cruelty, it's betraying the bloodline and wasting the family fortune. To him, the idea of me being an addict gutting the Blackwood empire was an unforgivable insult. He turned to me, his eyes cloudy from cataracts but flashing with pure resentment. "Eleanor? 10 years? And it was all just a sophisticated scam?" His voice was hoarse, each word hitting me like a bullet. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him I hadn't left this manor for more than 4 hours at a time in a decade, to tell him to look into my honest eyes. But Serafina was faster. She sobbed, burying her head in his shoulder. "I checked everything, Dad. The medical bills she reported were all inflated. She used your money to feed her habit and probably some lover in Boston. That's why she always refused to let me hire professional nurses. She wanted to isolate you so no one would find out." This was the peak of her malice. She had turned my sacrifice, my hands-on care to give him privacy and dignity, into a plot to isolate a victim. Alistair let out a groan of pain, not physical, but the sound of his last bit of faith collapsing. He grabbed the phone on his bedside table, his skeletal fingers dialing our family lawyer, Julian Vane. "Julian, get here now. I need to change the will. Immediately. Don't ask why. Bring the papers to strip Eleanor Blackwood of everything. She is no longer my daughter." Serafina met every word he spoke with a triumphant side glance toward me. She stood there in her elegant black silk dress, stroking our father's hair like a guardian angel, while in reality, she was the snake injecting venom into his heart. I stood as still as a statue, no tears, no screaming. In our world, the first one to lose their cool loses the game. I watched how Serafina smiled discreetly when Alistair hung up. She thought she had won. She thought making me penniless tonight was the end of the story. But as I watched her sneak the forged file back into her bag, I noticed one small detail. She was so arrogant she didn't realize I was holding our father's family signet ring, the one he had instinctively pulled off and thrown at me in his rage. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It contained the mechanical code for the hidden vault in the library, which held the original, honest child trust my father had created when he was at his sharpest. Serafina wanted a legal war based on lies, but she forgot that I was the keeper of the family's deepest truths. As I backed toward the door to make room for Julian, I saw my reflection in the mirror, cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of mercy. Alistair chose to believe in illusion, and Serafina chose to build her kingdom on quicksand. I would let them finish this new will. I would let Serafina enjoy feeling like a queen for a few days, because when the key in my hand turns, her entire gilded world will collapse in the most terrifying way a greedy heart can imagine. The Massachusetts sky today was the color of cold lead, pouring down a freezing drizzle that clung to the granite of the old Gothic church. Alistair Blackwood's funeral wasn't a place for mourning. It was a power play, a stage where those named Blackwood displayed the wealth and coldness typical of old money. I stood in the back row, completely isolated from the whispering relatives up front. I could feel their judgmental glares piercing through my black wool coat. The rumor had spread faster than a wildfire. Eleanor Blackwood, the devoted eldest daughter, was actually an addict who had been cut out of the will at the last second. At the very front, near the silver-plated casket, Serafina looked like a young widow straight off the cover of Vogue. She wore a Chanel suit and a hat with an intricate veil, occasionally dabbing fake tears with a hand-embroidered silk handkerchief. She played the grieving daughter so perfectly that even the old foxes on the board of directors nodded in sympathy. Beside her stood Julian Vane, the family lawyer, his face expressionless, holding the new will stained by Serafina's lies. When the ceremony ended, instead of letting everyone leave in silence, Serafina made the cruelest move in her plan. Right there on the church steps, in front of the entire Boston elite, she asked Julian to announce a summary of the final will adjustment. Julian's voice was steady and cold against the sound of the rain. All fixed assets, stocks, and control of the Blackwood Empire are to be transferred solely to Serafina Blackwood. Eleanor Blackwood is stripped of all rights and obligations regarding the family, effective immediately. A deadly silence fell, followed by malicious whispers. Serafina walked up to me, lifting her veil to reveal eyes sharp with satisfaction. "You heard that, right, Eleanor?" she said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Dad saw through your act. Someone like you doesn't deserve the Blackwood name. I've already had your things cleared out of the manor. Don't ever go back there." We moved to Blackwood Manor to clean up the remains. As my old black car pulled up to the main gate, I saw the scene Serafina had prepared to fully humiliate me. My 3 old suitcases had been tossed into the middle of the muddy driveway. My clothes, the medical books I used to research my father's condition, and the small memories of 10 years of sacrifice were all scattered, soaked in filthy rainwater. Serafina stepped out of her luxury Bentley, her high heels stepping on an old photo of me and my father. She looked at me with ultimate contempt. Pick up your trash and get out of here, junkie. If I catch you lurking around, I'll have security throw you out for trespassing. The guests with her began to snicker, hiding their laughs behind silk-gloved hands. They looked at me as if I were a lowly creature recently banished from a gilded paradise. I quietly walked over and knelt to pick up my things under their mocking eyes. My back remained straight, my face didn't change. This humiliation was necessary. It was the perfect camouflage to make Serafina believe she had completely won. Inside my coat pocket, my fingers tightened around the silver signet ring, the one thing she missed in her hunger for power. Before getting into my car to leave, I stopped and looked Serafina directly in the eye. I didn't talk about money or betrayal. I only said one thing in a low, razor-sharp voice. Dad always said that people who build castles on the bodies of others often forget that the foundation is made of blood and lies. Congratulations on your kingdom, Serafina. I hope you sleep well in that room full of ghosts. Serafina scoffed and turned back into the lavish manor, where the brilliant chandeliers were waiting for her celebration. She didn't know that the moment that heavy oak door slammed shut in my face, the countdown for her empire's execution had begun. I started the car, watching Blackwood Manor fade in the rearview mirror. Tonight's humiliation was a price I was willing to pay for her perfect collapse tomorrow. Tonight, she was the master of Blackwood, but I was the keeper of its soul and its true secrets. The legal game might have ended, but the war for the truth only begins when the secret key turns in the dark. New England nights don't know the meaning of mercy. They wrap everything in a bone-chilling silence, the kind of heavy darkness often found in rooms filled with old laws and family secrets that were never meant to see the light. I sat in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Boston, where the smell of stale cigarettes and industrial air freshener clashed sharply with the oak and incense of Blackwood Manor. On the scarred laminate table, my father's silver signet ring lay reflecting the flickering neon lights from outside. In the world of the elite, a ring is often just jewelry, but for the Blackwoods, it was a precision mechanical tool, a physical key for a security system that Alistair, in his most paranoid years, had created to guard against his own flesh and blood. My father was a man of contingency plans. He always said, "Money can blind the greedy, but the truth always has a fixed price." When he set up the Honest Child Trust 20 years ago, he embedded an incredibly harsh morality clause. This wasn't some vague rule about good behavior. It was a legal self-destruct mechanism. If the primary heir was proven to have used deception, forged evidence, or committed a grave insult against the deceased, all inheritance rights would immediately transfer to the next successor. The only problem, the original copy of this clause wasn't with Julian Vane, who had clearly been bought or fooled by Serafina. It was in a mechanical safe hidden behind a portrait of an ancestor in the Blackwood Library, and the ring I held was the way in. The next morning, I returned to Blackwood Manor under the perfect disguise of defeat. I purposefully wore my oldest clothes, let my hair get messy, and kept my eyes dull like someone who had just lost everything. I needed Serafina to believe she had broken me. When I stood at the iron gate, the guard looked at me with pity, but opened it anyway. Serafina was hosting a small tea party in the backyard to celebrate her takeover, with a few friends from the upper class. Seeing me, she couldn't hide her triumph, walking over with the posture of a queen granting a favor. "I thought I told you to disappear, Eleanor," she sneered, her voice sweet like poisoned honey. "Are you back to beg for drug money, or do you want to pick up some crumbs from my table?" I lowered my head, my voice calculatedly shaky. "Serafina, I just want to get Mom's old wooden box from the library. It has no value. Dad promised it to me long ago. Please, it's the only memory I have left." My groveling clearly fed Serafina's massive ego. She loved the feeling of seeing me beg in front of her friends. "The library? Oh, fine. Go find your trash, but be quick. I don't want the smell of failure sticking to Dad's expensive books. She turned back to her friends, laughing about her generosity, having no idea she had just allowed a Trojan horse into her kingdom. I walked into the library, where the smell of leather and old paper wrapped around me like a close friend. I moved quickly toward the portrait of Alistair Blackwood the First. My hands, used to the delicate tasks of caring for my father, moved with the precision of a professional thief. I pressed the face of the ring into a small notch hidden under the gilded frame and turned it 3 times clockwise. A dry click echoed, the sound of justice beginning to move. A secret panel opened, revealing a small compartment containing a folder sealed with red wax. Inside wasn't just the original trust with the lethal morality clause. Alistair, in the final clarity of a financial fox, had left a handwritten letter dated just before Seraphina's return. In it, he wrote, "If Eleanor is reading this, it means I was wrong about loyalty, and Seraphina has proven exactly what I feared most about greed." He knew, or at least, he suspected. Holding the documents, my heart raced, but my mind was colder than ever. I didn't leave immediately. I pulled out a tiny recording device and a micro camera I had prepared, secretly attaching them to the underside of the large oak desk, where I knew for a fact Seraphina would sit tonight to count her assets and drink to her victory with Julian. I needed a living proof, a moment where she would admit her deception out of her own mouth. As I walked out of the manor with the old wooden box in my arms like a broken person, Seraphina was still laughing in the yard. She gave me one last look of contempt, not knowing that in my hands was the death warrant for her entire future. I walked out of the Blackwood gates, but this time, I didn't look back in pain. I looked forward to where justice is served, not through mercy, but through the harshest punishment for a traitor. The game finally belonged to me. The light from the crystal chandeliers in the main living room of Blackwood Manor was blindingly bright tonight, casting a yellowish glow like the fake plating on Seraphina's character. The smell of expensive champagne and expensive cigars filled the air, a blatant insult to the soul of our father who had just been laid to rest. I stood at the threshold of the library, clutching the old wooden box, the only inheritance I had pretended to beg for. Through the crack in the door, I watched Seraphina sitting in our father's leather armchair, her feet on the oak desk, swirling a full glass of wine. She was celebrating with Julian Vane, the lawyer who had sold his soul to the devil for a percentage of this stolen legacy. I took a deep breath, adjusting my face to look broken and desperate before stepping into their sight. This was the most critical part of the game, the provocation. To make a snake show its venom, you have to make it believe the prey is completely paralyzed. As I walked in, Seraphina's laughter stopped, replaced by a look of utter disgust. "Oh, look at that! The rat still hasn't left the sinking ship?" She smirked, her voice already slurring from the alcohol. I didn't strike back with anger. I let my voice tremble, my eyes fixed on my father's portrait on the opposite wall. "Seraphina, how can you do this on the very day of Dad's funeral? He always loved you, even when you disappeared for years." That was the perfect spark. Seraphina burst out laughing, slamming her glass onto the table, right near where I had hidden the micro-recorder. "Loved me? Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. That old man loved his empire. He loved the Blackwood reputation, but he never loved us. He was a senile dictator who spent his life trying to control everything, but in the end, his own paranoia was what took him down. All it took was a few photoshopped pictures and a little script about you being a junkie, and he discarded his golden daughter without a second thought. The old man was so easy to fool, I almost felt sorry for his intelligence." Julian Vane cleared his throat, perhaps having enough sense left to be worried about her loose tongue. "Seraphina, you've had too much to drink. We have what we want. Don't say anything more." But pride is a poison with no antidote. Serafina waved him off and stood up to get in my face, the smell of wine heavy on her breath. She picked up the photo of my father on the desk, looked at it, and spat a small bit of saliva onto the gilded frame. Look at yourself, Eleanor. You sacrificed 10 years of your youth for what? To be discarded at the last minute? And me? It took me 1 week to take it all. Dad died like a fool, believing he was serving justice when he was really just a puppet in my hands. All those bank records, those offshore transfers. They were all my masterpieces. And Honorable Julian here helped me make them legal. Justice doesn't exist at Blackwood, Eleanor. There is only power and the people who know how to seize it. Every word, every single syllable. All of it was captured perfectly by the recorder blinking green in the dark under the desk. I looked into her eyes, and this time there was no fake weakness, only a deep sense of pity. So, you admit you forged it all? You admit Dad was fooled until his very last breath? Yes, I admit it. So what? Serafina screamed, the madness of power having completely taken over her mind. What are you going to do? Call the police? Who's going to believe a junkie who was cut out of the will by her own father? You have no evidence, no money, and no status. I own Blackwood. Now, take your box of trash and get out of here before I have security throw you in the lake. I backed away, clutching the wooden box to my chest like a treasure. Internally, I was counting my heartbeat, a steady, cold rhythm. The bait was taken. She hadn't just admitted to fraud, she had insulted the memory and honor of Alistair Blackwood in front of the family lawyer, the very man she had just accidentally dragged into the pit of complicity. Her arrogance made her forget that in the world of the New England elite, evidence doesn't need to be in the newspapers to destroy someone. Sometimes it just needs to be sent to the right people holding the financial scales. I turned and walked out of the living room without a word of goodbye. As the great doors of Blackwood Manor closed behind me, I looked up at the starry New England night sky. The freezing air filled my lungs, bringing a sense of cleansing. The recording in my pocket wasn't just sound, it was the explosion of the bomb that would level Serafina's kingdom in less than 24 hours. Tomorrow morning, the board of the trust fund and the Attorney General's office will receive a very special gift. Serafina thought she won a war, but she didn't know she just signed her own exile from this gilded world forever. Monday morning in Boston brought a bone-chilling cold off the Atlantic, winding through the glass and steel skyscrapers of the financial district. In the 42nd floor office of Vane & Associates, Serafina was sitting in a padded leather chair, holding our father's gold-plated Parker pen, preparing to sign the final documents to transfer the entire Blackwood family portfolio into her personal account. Julian Vane stood beside her, his smile both smug and anxious, his eyes constantly darting to the Patek Philippe on his wrist. They were in a hurry. They needed to finish laundering the assets before any audit could begin. "Just sign it, Serafina," Julian urged, his voice low and calculating. "Once these numbers are in the Cayman Trust, no one can touch them. Eleanor is gone, and she's nothing but a ghost in those fake medical records we created." Serafina smiled, a bright but empty expression. She lowered the pen toward the paper that smelled of expensive ink. But just before the nib touched the page, the double oak doors of the office swung open. It wasn't a violent bang, but an entrance so calm and authoritative, it froze the air in the room. I walked in, no longer looking like the defeated person from yesterday. I was wearing a custom navy suit, my hair pulled back into a tight bun, and walking beside me were 3 middle-aged men in charcoal gray suits, the board of directors of the Blackwood Trust, led by Mr. Harrison, my father's best friend and most discreet financial advisor. Serafina's face went from flush to pale in a single second. She snapped upright, the pen hitting the oak desk with a dry clack. "Eleanor? What the hell are you doing here? Julian, call security. She's trespassing." "Calm down, Serafina," I said, my voice so level it surprised even me. I placed the red leather folder from the hidden vault onto the desk, right on top of the papers Julian had prepared. You have no right to kick me out. In fact, in 5 minutes, you might not have the right to step foot on any Blackwood property again. Julian Vane stuttered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Eleanor, this is my private office. The new will has been authenticated. You have no legal standing. Mr. Vane? Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice deep and heavy like a church bell. I'm afraid you've forgotten your fiduciary duty. We aren't here for that amended will. We are here for the Honest Child Trust, the one Alistair Blackwood established with our board's backing 2 decades ago. And more importantly, we are here because the morality clause was triggered last night. I pulled out a tablet and hit play. The large office was immediately filled with Seraphina's high-pitched, drunken, and venomous voice from the night before. The old man was so easy to fool I almost felt sorry. He died like a fool. All those bank records were my masterpieces. And Julian here helped me make them legal. The camera footage showed Seraphina spitting on our father's portrait, crystal clear and brutal. A silence so heavy it made my ears ring settled over the room. Seraphina was trembling, her lips moving but no words coming out. I looked her in the eye, and there was no more sadness in mine, only cold justice. Seraphina, the morality clause in the trust clearly states, any act of deception, forgery of documents for profit, or grave defamation against the deceased will result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of inheritance rights. What you just heard isn't just moral evidence, it's criminal evidence of financial fraud that Mr. Vane here assisted with. Mr. Harrison stepped forward and took the pen from the table. As of this moment, every account in Seraphina Blackwood's name originating from the family has been frozen for investigation. Mr. Vane, the Massachusetts Bar Association will receive this recording along with a formal complaint by noon today. I suggest you start looking for a lawyer for yourself instead of worrying about your client. Seraphina collapsed back into the leather chair, her eyes wide with horror as she stared into nothing. The gilded kingdom she had built with lies had crumbled in a single night, not with swords, but with her own words. I stood there looking down at the 2 people who had purposefully trampled on 10 years of my youth and my love for my father. This wasn't a revenge of violence. It was a revenge of intellect and patience, the true Blackwood style. I didn't feel joy, I only felt a dark relief. My father's justice, though late, was being served from the grave through my hands. The silence in that 42nd floor office wasn't peace. It was the deathly quiet before a financial storm wipes everything away. Seraphina sat frozen, her eyes glued to the tablet screen as it replayed her own sinful recording over and over. Sweat began to ruin the expensive foundation on her face, revealing the pathetic reality of someone who had just lost her gilded mask. She looked at me, then at Mr. Harrison, her lips trembling. Julian Vane, the lawyer who once prided himself on his cruel wisdom, now looked like a cornered rat, his hands shaking as he gathered the worthless papers on the desk as a reflex. This is a setup, a cheap edit. Seraphina finally found her voice, but it wasn't the usual arrogance. It was the desperate scream of a drowning person. She lunged toward the desk to grab the tablet, but 2 security guards from the board stepped in, stopping her with cold professionalism. You can't do this, Eleanor. Dad left everything to me. You're just a mentally ill junkie. No one believes an addict. I walked closer to her, so close I could smell her Chanel perfume mixing with the scent of fear. I looked directly into her bloodshot eyes, my voice low but sharp as a scalpel. The difference between us, Seraphina, is that I don't need anyone to believe me. I only need the numbers and the undeniable evidence. The fake medical records you made for me? Mr. Harrison's legal team already found the nurse you bribed to sign them. The offshore transfers? They were red flagged by federal auditors the moment you tried to move them. You didn't just lose an inheritance battle. You're facing a federal indictment for financial fraud and money laundering. Julian Vane suddenly dropped to his knees, grabbing Mr. Harrison's sleeve in a pathetic plea. "Mr. Harrison, please. I only followed her instructions. I was coerced. I'll cooperate. I'll provide all the evidence of how Serafina forged Alistair's signature." Betrayal always comes with cowardice. Serafina's closest accomplice turned on her the second the scent of prison entered the room. Serafina looked at Julian with disgust, then turned to me, her madness clear. "You think you won? You'll never have the respect of this society. They'll always remember you as the one your own father kicked out." I smiled, a smile with zero warmth. "They'll remember what I want them to remember, Serafina. The old money crowd has one rule. They don't care about the truth. They only care about the winner and the one holding the power. And right now, that's me." Mr. Harrison stepped up, placing a stack of freezing orders on the desk. "Ms. Blackwood, by order of the board and based on the evidence of morality clause violations, your access to Blackwood Manor has been revoked. Security is currently at the manor escorting your party guests out. Your belongings will be sent to a warehouse in the suburbs. You are no longer part of this empire." The next scene felt like a slow-motion movie of a collapse. Serafina was led out of the office by security in front of every employee in the firm, the same people who had bowed to her as a queen just minutes ago. The clacking of her heels on the marble floor sounded lonely and pathetic. Julian Vane was led away shortly after by the white-collar crime police who were waiting in the lobby. The massive office was left with just me, Mr. Harrison, and the shadows of sad memories. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the busy Boston traffic. I had taken everything back: power, assets, and honor. But in my heart, a dark void remained. I suddenly remembered my father's face in his final moments, his anger toward me, an anger built on lies. This revenge couldn't bring him back, but it ensured that no one would ever trample on the legacy he spent his life building again. "Eleanor," Mr. Harrison's voice softened, and he put a hand on my shoulder. "You did well. Alistair would be proud of your strength. Now, where do you want to start?" I looked toward the distant horizon, where Blackwood Manor sat silently waiting for its true master. "I want to clean that house, Mr. Harrison. The scent of betrayal needs to be fully scrubbed away before I can sleep well again. And prepare the paperwork to strike Julian Vane's name from every family partnership. Blackwood does not accept traitors." Serafina's fake empire had shattered into 1,000 pieces at my feet. Tonight, I would return to Blackwood Manor, not as a mourning caregiver, but as the only guardian of justice left in the family. The game was over for them, but for me, a new chapter, cold, powerful, and full of truth, had just begun. The black family Rolls-Royce pulled up to the gates as night fell, the New England air thick and freezing like a final judgment. The headlights illuminated people leaving in chaos. By order of the board, private security had begun cleaning the manor 2 hours ago. Serafina's high society friends, the ones who mocked me at the funeral, were now rushing to pull their suitcases to the gate, their faces showing panic and shame under the flashes of a few paparazzi who had smelled the blood. I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking on the gravel path with a rhythmic, sharp sound that echoed like the countdown of a death sentence. I didn't look at the people fleeing. To me, they were just stains that needed to be washed away. I walked straight into the grand hall, where the smell of hard liquor and cigarettes still lingered, a blatant insult to the dignity of the Blackwood name. Harrison was waiting for me at the foot of the great staircase, holding a thick personnel file. "All intruders have been removed. Eleanor," he said with absolute respect, "and we've begun a full audit of every staff member. Those who took bribes from Serafina to mistreat you or fake medical reports won't just be fired. They will face criminal charges. I nodded, my eyes turning to the butler standing in the corner, the man who had looked at me with contempt when Serafina kicked me out in the rain. He was trembling, his hands clasped tight, trying to hold onto some shred of dignity. I walked up to him, my voice devoid of anger, just a chilling coldness. You worked for my father for 15 years. You knew the truth about the nights I sat by his bed. But you chose silence for an envelope of cash from Serafina. At Blackwood, betrayal is the only unforgivable sin. You have 10 minutes to pack. After that, your name will be blacklisted by every high-end butler agency in the country. You didn't just lose a job, you lost your career. As the butler stumbled away, I began the most important part of the purge: social isolation. In the New England old money world, reputation is life. I sat at my father's desk in the library and drafted a memo to the boards of the most exclusive clubs in Boston, New York, and Newport. The information about Serafina's disinheritance for morality clause, violations, and the evidence of fraud would be sent officially. By morning, Serafina would realize she was no longer a Blackwood. The doors she once walked through with arrogance would be slammed shut forever. She wouldn't be able to book a table at any restaurant. She wouldn't be invited to any gala, and most importantly, no one in the elite would dare mention her name if they didn't want to be seen as an accomplice to a family sinner. I stood up and went to Serafina's old room. I ordered the staff to bring all her haute couture clothes, her Hermes bags, and the jewelry collection she bought with Dad's money to the backyard. Burn it all, I said shortly. Harrison looked at me with surprise. But Eleanor, these are worth millions of dollars. They have no value, Harrison. I cut him off, my gaze sharp as ice. They are items bought with deception and my father's blood. I don't want anything of hers existing in this house. Blackwood Manor needs to be clean before sunrise. Watching the fire roar in the backyard, burning the symbols of her fake vanity, I felt a dark relief take over my mind. This is how the American elite handle traitors. No loud arguments, just a total and systematic erasure. That night, I went back to my father's bedroom. I took a white cloth, dipped it in warm water with a bit of cedar oil, the scent he loved most, and personally cleaned his portrait, where Serafina had spat the night before. Looking into his stern eyes in the photo, I promised him that his legacy was now in the hands of the one who deserved it most. Serafina was now just a ghost wandering through cheap hotels, waiting for the Attorney General's verdict. The purge was complete. Blackwood Manor had returned to its dignified silence. I turned off the light, letting the darkness take the room, and for the first time in 10 years, I slept without dreams, knowing that every piece of trash from the betrayal had been swept out of my life. The war was over, and I was the last one standing in this cold kingdom. The first snow of winter finally fell on Blackwood Manor, covering the quiet gardens in a layer of freezing white silk. I stood by the large library window, holding a hot cup of Earl Grey, the steam fogging up a corner of the glass. The world outside was freezing over, but inside me, for the first time in a decade, the fire of anxiety had died out, replaced by a dark, powerful peace. On the oak desk, this morning's Boston Globe sat with a bold headline, "The Fall of a Fake Empire. Blackwood heiress faces federal charges." The update from Harrison last night was that Serafina couldn't post bail. Not one of her friends in Manhattan or Paris picked up the phone when she called for help. In the American elite, a lie can be forgiven if it brings profit. But the stupidity of getting caught and staining the family name is a social death sentence. Serafina wasn't just broke, she was a pariah. All the assets she had grabbed were recovered and moved into a charity trust in my father's name for poor patients needing long-term medical care. The ultimate bitter irony for the woman who once mocked my devotion at his bedside. Julian Vane wasn't doing any better. Boston's once most respected lawyer had been disbarred and was preparing for an investigation into a long history of will tampering. Serafina's collapse had caused a domino effect, cleaning out the filthiest corners of our family's network. The justice I served wasn't just for me. It was a major surgery for the entire Blackwood Empire, cutting out the parasites that had lived off our honor for too long. I looked down at the silver signet ring on my finger. It was no longer a burden or a hidden code. It was a symbol of continuity. I remembered my opening words. People say sisters should be best friends, but my sister was my worst enemy. Now those words sounded like a distant reminder of a naive time. Serafina taught me that blood isn't the strongest bond, it's honesty and self-respect. My father, Alistair, though he passed in a painful misunderstanding, was the winner in the end. He had set up a system smart enough to protect the child who was actually worthy, even when his own mind was covered in fog. I walked over to my father's portrait and placed my palm on the cold frame. "It's all over, Dad," I whispered into the quiet room. "Your legacy isn't in the hands of someone who insulted it anymore. Blackwood will be a name of honor again, not of lies." I felt a small spark in my heart, not regret, but a strange bridge between the past and the future. I won't sell this manor. I'll turn it into a symbol of New England resilience. I'll run the trust with an iron hand and a clear heart, ensuring every dollar with the Blackwood name serves its true purpose. This morning, I received an anonymous letter at the gate. Inside was just an old photo of me and Serafina as children, playing on this very lawn. I looked at it for a long time, then without hesitation, I tossed it into the fireplace. The past had turned to ash, along with the blind mercy I once had for my sister. In the world of old money, emotion is a luxury that the one in power must sometimes sacrifice to protect the kingdom. The phone rang. Harrison was letting me know the board was ready for our first strategic meeting under my leadership. I adjusted my suit collar and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman in the reflection wasn't the sad, exhausted caregiver anymore. That was Eleanor Blackwood, the true master of Blackwood Manor, the one who walked through the hell of betrayal to touch the silver throne. This revenge didn't taste sweet like honey. It had the sharp bite of aged wine and the coldness of white snow, a flavor only a true survivor can appreciate. I walked out of the library, my footsteps heavy and solid on the oak floor. The manor doors opened, letting in the freezing winter air. I looked toward the main gate, where a new chapter of my life was beginning. Serafina once said I had nothing, but today I have everything she ever wanted. Power, freedom, and a clear soul. Blackwood Manor still stands against the storm, and I, Eleanor, will be the one to keep the fire burning forever. My father's justice from the grave was complete, and I was the one who carried out that final will with the ultimate ruthlessness and pride of an honest daughter.